Composing for me is not making up notes. It's daydreaming in a retrieving manner from some distant past within layers of vanished memories, possibly subconsciously. Music plays in me from within. It's not an effort to receive it from within. The effort is to filter it. If and how the inner message comes out to be existing in notation and then eventually in performance, and ultimately, is it even necessary? Given the fact that classical music at this point has so many centuries of so many pieces that are so beautiful, meaningful, and alas, many forgotten, invisibilized by the memory of time. So why have the lack of humility to consider that I need to add my own? Because it is not an action, therefore there is no consequence to it, in the sense that it's not a commission, it's not an obligation, it's not a necessity for a purpose of it other than to leave a trace of my inner world musically and share with those who would like to find perhaps in it something meaningful for them to express through my music, their own inner worlds, as I do as a performer, as I do as a teacher for composers either alive and most of them dead for so much that we have no more knowledge of how it's supposed to be done other than our recent generations of famous specialists of them. And I find it ultimately humbling. But in right of being the performer of music that has been the inner world, the inner hearing of somebody else somewhere in time, the romantic image of the message in the bottle in the sea is a little bit overused, because we have traditions, we have knowledge, we have a lot of musicologists and scholars who have given us so much information of how it's supposed to be considered, played, informing us about this or that traditions of this or that time periods, not to mention the plethora of different editions of the same works. It's almost as if a performer who plays a music that a composer heard before anybody else had heard this music, and now it's in self-evident fact, especially when the composition becomes a repertoire essential. We take it for granted. The fourth ballade by Chopin always existed. The Pathétique sonata by Beethoven always existed. Bach's second partita always existed. For us, And for generations before us, yes, that's how it became to be. Instead of the fact that we have to realize that nevertheless, before they were written, they didn't exist. Potentially they were there in nature because the sounds are there, just how you organize them. It's not like you invented those sounds. They used 7 tones of perfect fifth circle and organized in tonalities from which they more or less took little liberties from, but not much enough to break the system through which they express their own individualities of the tonality, through the tonality, or despite the tonality. In other words, it's the vehicle, not the purpose, to write tonal for them. Is it because they didn't live long enough for most? Is it because they didn't feel the necessity that what they have heard innerly needs to be expressed in a post-tonal world with new alphabet of music, new syntax of music, new letters and sounds and phonemes, in other words, a new language, universal or individual for each of them, as it is the case today for a lot of the modern or living composers? I don't know. The earnest motivation beyond the skillful knowledge of how they knew how to compose was to survive. Music was not recorded, music was rarely published, or little of it. Music was either improvised, either notated for a quick usage immediately. It was a commission, it was a survival mission, it was an obligation to produce a lot of music for different occasions, which was in fact rarely reheard in their time. So with the recording industry, with the publishing industry, with the music schools industry, with the musicologists industry, with the radio and podcast producers industry, and the general between craftsmanship and science of music applied for film, for video game, for commercial music, for today compared to what was in the past, opera, for mythical storytellings compared to film, theater, reenactments of Jesus' suffering as the passions were, masses for the worship, and then for the secular need, dances and songs, and music is a uplifting spirit even for the soldiers marching towards their fate. So we have marches, we have funeral marches, we have dances, we have social dances, we have state dances, we have state anthems, we have music for entertaining. Well, the entertainment music of today is really apart from the so-called serious music, but in fact, in the past, not so much. The same composers produced a little of all. For instance, Mozart did. And the versatility through the craftsmanship allowed them to compose fast and specifically for different genres, a piano concerto, a string quintet, um, opportunity to play for rich connoisseurs who were amateurs themselves with them and for their friends in the salons. Chamber music was um, an extension of this beyond the church music and the opera and ballet dance music. So they have those organizations that allowed music or needed both music. And when the cinema arrived, even the specifically silent one, after the Lumiere brothers' invention, they hired pianists and organists in movie theaters to improvise during the silent films. So at every step of the way, Scarlatti teaching the children of the Queen of Spain, or Johann Christian Bach teaching the children of the King of England, they composed sonatas, which are called, for Scarlatti, used to be exercizi, etudes or studies. Chopin and Liszt, well, more Chopin didactically, Liszt artistically composed etudes for piano. But Madame de Montgeroux, as a first piano teacher, composed at the Paris Conservatory, newly built by the French Revolution in the 1790s, piano etudes, again pedagogically. And same thing with Debussy, who wrote preludes for the mood and etudes for the fingers, typically renewing in his time this tradition of the didactical instrumental learning pattern. Bartok, Prokofiev, Stravinsky, many composers of the 20th century wrote also etudes. So when you're faced today as a young student with teachers or just on your own with all the available personalities who you can admire online in this concert stage, you see that most of them play the music of the past. Very few play music of today, either because, I guess, language barrier with the post-tonal music is a divorce with the traditional audience that organizers fear. Either music written today in the post-tonal tradition, but without breaking with it as a tool, not as an end by itself, to express itself, is not necessary because there is already so much tonal music written before. And so when you come down to the fact of composing music, if it's an inner necessity, you do it because you have to, like a painting, a poetry, pottery. You can end up thinking it's just what it is, a hobby in the bona fide sense of the necessity of it, but it's not a need because of a lack. As a matter of fact, with piano repertoire, for instance, and not only, but mostly, it's an overwhelming amount of repertoire of which so little is constantly performed and so much is ignored that I feel like my own music in my humble path will be only added to this invisible column of unnecessary forgotten music, which is meaningful to the composer enough to have written it, extracted it from inside themselves. That they could play it or not, that's different. Some did, mostly did, because it was part of the education to compose, part of the interpretation to improvise. There was not so much early educational in music compartmentation between the performer and the creator. And today it is true that it's lesser the case. So it's suspicious to composers to play and suspicious to pianists to compose. From the point of view of their individual trades, which are their niches through which they excel in their careers, in crafting, in fact, their interpretations of the famous works of the past as their own oeuvre, their own creative portion of their life, rather than the notes themselves. And therefore, I wonder by projection and a little bit provocative humor, did anybody ask Rachmaninoff, Chopin, Liszt, Mozart, after they performed a piece of theirs in the given setting in which they played it, if their interpretation of their work was right? Since that's what we ask of the performers who didn't compose the piece, and the teachers who say how it's supposed to be played, and the music critics who's supposed to know better, and they write it, and they established norms, and then we find ourselves in a situation where we have to find the inner world's truth to what this music is to us. The tempo, the phrasing, the amount of freedom with the pulse, the shaping of the lines. How much is too much of all of these innuendos? Well, naturally, when the performer plays their own music, you don't question it. When you try to guess it because the creators, performers left their creation for us to perform, or we choose to perform it over and over generations after each other who has never had an opportunity to hear them play, because technology didn't allow the recording, and the people who have heard them have gone long time ago from this earth. Then we have these traditions, these writings of people who have heard them perform, say, Chopin did this with the left hand, and the rubato was in the right hand, and the melody versus the conductor, the rubato. Oh, it was unforgettable how Mozart improvised this cadenza while performing a concerto, and how incredible it was when this and that. But words could describe moods that were created by the sheer magic of the moment, but it's not a documented recording. It's a description of the music which describes itself the mood that was set and that was striking enough for them to write about. Memorialize the moment they lived as a listener. And then we can choose from there to learn more about, from the instrument builders, how the instruments were crafted. Therefore, by learning how to play them, in the manner that it was played with their treatises. We can learn about the bowing speed and for the string instruments, and then the phrasing by groups of 2 or 3 notes, and therefore retrofit the tempi they chose with the instruments they had for the acoustics in which they expressed. That is archaeological type of retracing the truth about forgotten music of the past, at least the way it was played. But when we receive it in the notated manner of the score, and we play it on modern instruments with modern acoustics, perhaps and inevitably we, if not betray, because that would be a willing malice, it's more about, besides our love for their music, we share it with the instruments of today and audiences of today, and teach it to students of today who compete in competitions of today and who perform online, in studio, in concert halls, make recordings with different tone engineering enhancements. In other words, the length of tone, the action of the tone projection, the expectation of the phrasing, the voicing, the need for shaping the texture in an attractive way for all these acoustical effects. It's probably all over, even with the pitch itself having risen, if not an evolution, at least transformation of how the music was heard on their instruments in their time, with their pitches and their tuning, and therefore their audience. So a chamber music heard in the salon of a patron and a concert hall with rows and rows of people sitting is a transformation of its intimacy. Therefore, the balance between the instruments has evolved. The instrument's production of sound has evolved. The modern bow length of articulation, phrasing, the modern piano with the iron sound cast and the steel strings projects and holds the sound longer. The very concept of sound length and phrasing and tempo, that is either the mood of the music as hinted and suggested by the notation and some markings that we assume by the musical intuition of ours and all this knowledge, and the limitations of the instruments if we use theirs. So it is not a limitation, it is just the ecosystem in which the music was played in its own time, through which instruments, for which end, and with what speed of production and obsolescence, so that it has to be redone. That's how people wrote 100 symphonies like Haydn and cantatas like Bach, and each of them was not industrially crafted, even if at some point the craftsmanship became sort of industrialized, because you realize that they wrote very complex individual intentions in each, with subtle complexities that would necessitate today, when we take care of them, to learn them, study them, record them, teach them, publish them, write about them individually, years. and hours of rehearsals with orchestras of this repertoire, which is being learned for the last centuries already by so many generations, and we still need that when it was read and sight read on stage in the 18th century or the 19th century mostly. So you would wonder if, because of the communality of the language they used, they could go through these quick put together and forget and restart with the next piece. I'm deeply questioning the quality of their performances. Did they really have the time to be penetrated by all the subtleties that are suggested in the pieces? Did they have time, or did they wish to have time? Or perhaps they didn't need to. They produced so much music. And today, centuries later, it is our own present music, playing it with music instruments modeled of the past or on the modern instruments of today, however betraying that might be to the original intent. We still consider it really music of today. At least those who are involved in classical music, I don't think we consider that we are in a museum, archaeological action. We're just in satisfying our urge of musical emotion, drive, intellectual, bewildering, and organization to produce this sound and bring it back to life from the page on which it was notated, but between the notes, it's life that brings it back alive. So how is the question, and how that's how we disagree, a lot of us today. At least many do. I personally welcome the differences while I have opinions in interpretations, because I find that Mademoiselle Boulanger had taught me to be unforgiving with myself and tolerant with the others. And that is a very difficult thing to do, because most people in the classical music business do the exact opposite. They are so accepting of their shortcomings and so critical of the others. It gives them a necessity to express their know-how. It's supposed to be like that. It's not supposed to be like this, as if they were there when it was made. And ultimately, does it really matter? Because I have been privileged that some of my music meant enough to some people to have played it, performed it, recorded it. And I have not bugged them either to do it, let less, that would be not fair, let less when they were doing it, as if because I'm the composer of the piece they chose to play, to love, to cherish, perhaps that it's meaningful for them to share with their audiences or to have in their repertoire, for which I'm very grateful. At my humble level, who am I compared to the great ones? But if my music message means something, it's beyond me and beyond us. It's just the music message. Doesn't matter how I hear it in my head when I compose it, because my interpretation is not a choice. It comes with the music itself that I hear inside myself. But it does not exclude, if people choose it, to play it a way that I wouldn't have imagined it. So, in other words, I don't make it right or wrong. I don't pretend to. I don't pretend to not care either by saying whichever way it will be good, because it would appear like I have no opinion. So it's a subtle honesty between conviction and open mindedness, between gratefulness for being played and non intrusiveness in their obligation of how they will like the piece. Because I find it a gift when I am in a jury and people play the same piece by so many performers who tend to try sound the same because of publishers, teachers, recordings imitating each other and trying to play it the most perfect without mistakes, hoping to be chosen to have a career to perform it as they would like to, hopefully ultimately. So in a comparison of alikes, the individualities are erased, or if they are too obvious, they are rejected. But that's the nature of competitions. I still find fantastic that on an industrial instrument as the piano and the very industrial capacity of today's interpretations, because of the multiplied schools and recordings available to imitate, even even though this kind of norm has established itself, you hear differences in interpretation, in points of view. And it's not your music, it's the music of the master whom you tried to learn when you were young. And now you're sitting in a jury hearing other young people discovering what it means to them. And before us, there were so many more. And therefore, the text was here before us, and the text will be here after us. And we put it alive temporarily, ephemerally, as it means to us. So it could be laughable to coming generations when trends of interpretations evolve through, the fashions of the day. But at the same time, I respect very much what it meant for those who shared the music played that way and for whom it was an intense emotion. And it was a shared moment. And I think that gift, it's a spiritual uplifting. We are there gathered, or perhaps now scattered electronically, but when we used to be physically gathered to share a piece of music and its message, whatever it is, and how well or wrongly or partially it is perceived by us according to our awareness of its meaning in all its levels. Or just perhaps just enjoying it because we like the performer, or because we wanted to be with a friend or with a date attending this performance. For whichever reason we shared that moment with strangers together, that could mean many different things for each of us, even among the ones who know about it, like jury members of a competition, or audience members who are there goodwillingly to receive this music. So they might reject it, find it boring, meaningless, tiring. They don't know when it ends, when shall I applaud? I don't feel like I know enough. Therefore, knowing is loving, loving is understanding, understanding is perhaps teaching others how to enjoy it. And there is a pedagogical dimension to broadcasts, to podcasts, where people learn about elements that they didn't know in the why they might have liked this film of this filmmaker, or this scientific discovery of this scientist, and all of a sudden, either by the old-fashioned way, go in a library, read a book about it, or today for most young people is click and watch a video where somebody explains you some subtleties because your curiosity brought you to it. Have you liked it in the first place or been hooked to it by some situational moment where you just found yourself there and you say, hey, I want to know more. It doesn't mean that you'll like it more. You might end up not liking it at all and say, it's not for me. That's fine. Not necessary, but it becomes a need when you like something. I guess curiosity comes after loving because you want to, perhaps if not understand, know more about it. But there is some, not magic because it's a sort of a cheesy word, but I would say mystery in the real meaning of the word, mysterium. That not everything explainable is meaningful. It's like faith. And the need for something transcendental, something beyond our finitude, something that comes from the ages and that might continue for the ages of other people's lives, peopling them with what it people does, perhaps differently, perhaps with some communalities for what it meant. And these reflections touch me very deeply because since I was born, I heard sounds inside myself, not knowing what they meant. Like when you wake up from a dream and you vaguely remember it until it evaporates, but you cannot make a screenplay of it, and you don't have to, or write a novel about it, or have to. And it's a fleeting moment, like so many fleeting moments, conscient or subconscious. And when you capture it, as composers did, as I do, I think to a certain extent I craft it according to curve it and shape it and carve it into a musical sculpture equivalent, or the shape and the destination are secondary to the essence of it. I think a melodic line is like an unbelievably unforgettable perfume, or that brings you to mentally back to a place you were when something happened in your life, and somehow by the olfactive memory you're brought back to it. And so a melodic line, like people used to have a song when they used to dance on it when they were dating and saying, this is our song. It's part of the life of us. I find it fascinating because I see that with craftsmanship studies and know-how, you can compose music even without inspiration. You can perform pieces without meaning, other than just playing all the right notes to win a competition, because it's a drive by itself, on itself. And that's nothing wrong with it, ultimately. But when you look at yourself in your soul mirror and you say, what am I doing it for? Other than the mundane necessities in which I find myself triggered in, it has to be meaningful to you for the hours and hours and hours and hours for which you will try to craft this service to the muse.